Bonjour. Mon vocabulaire en français, c'est comme 30 mots. Et j'ai vraiment envie d'être un Parisien. Alors quand j'arrive ici, je rentre à un restaurant. Et je rentre, je dis une table pour un. Et le gars dit toujours « How many? » Un. Et qu'est-ce que vous mangez? Je ne sais pas, rognon ou un pot-au-feu. Would you like that with ketchup? Alors, c'est un peu difficile. Je veux être un indigène, une personne parisienne, mais ça marche pas. Ça, c'est mon vocabulaire en français. Alors, en anglais. My name is Joshua. I spend my life talking about web performance, and I blog at Web Performance Today. I'm here to talk today. I want to share with you a secret, and I want to share with the bosses in the group a secret that your geeks have been trying to tell you. And for geeks, I want to show you how you can present to your bosses so they'll listen. I want to take you through performance and the pain of waiting. Because when I pause, that phone starts to itch in your pocket. Your attention goes elsewhere. I want to talk today about money. And I want to talk today about how that person, the geek, can look at the boss and communicate. And it's not just about money. It's actually about money on your mobile phone, on this. It's been said that the best minds of our generation are finding ways to make you click on ads. In my opinion, the best minds are often working in hedge funds trying to steal our money, but it is possible that some are working on ways to make us click on ads on our mobile phones. Let's hope they work for Facebook. What we're here to talk about is not just money, but it's about speed and money. And at the end of this, I hope that I can change your priorities. I hope that you make speed more important. As Olivier said, it's about facts. It's about research. So we're going to sit and we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the research that exists in the field. We're going to talk about the progression of mobile, and we're going to look at some case studies. Let's go. So here's the secret. Google found it very, very early. Let's take a look at this video. Did you notice that? That was 400 milliseconds. For the geeks in the room, this is what it means. Percentage change in the number of searches, and on the x-axis, delays that Google entered into their site, into their search results site, in milliseconds. For the bosses in the room, let me communicate this in a bit of a different form. 400 milliseconds for Google, according to their 2011 financial statements, is worth $182 million. Bing. Let's take a look at this. I bring that to most CFOs, CMOs. It's not a big difference. Really? Again, percentage change, different delays, 50 milliseconds, all the way up to 2 seconds, and the change in the key business metrics. All of these studies are on desktop. What does somebody do when they're coming in on Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Chrome? Compelling. You've got my interest. Shopzilla. Let's take a look at that. %12 increase in revenue. AOL. Slightly different. What they did is they looked at the visitor load time percentile, the fastest or the slowest 10% down here, the fastest 10% down there, and how many pages they clicked on. If you're AOL, pages are ads, ads are revenue. That was a very short lecture on the history and many of the studies that have been done on the relationship between performance in the desktop environment and revenue. There are 20 or 30 others in the field. Most experts now believe that on the desktop world, there is strong and compelling evidence to suggest that the speed of your site directly impacts the key business metrics that you live and breathe every day. As somebody who sells performance acceleration, that's the business that I founded, this is very important to me because when I walk in and talk to a CFO or a CMO or a VP of e-commerce, my conversation isn't about theoretical speed, it's about revenue. Google introduced about 2 years ago the fact that speed would be a ranking criteria in search engine rankings. So not only does speed matter for revenue, pages per visit, ad clicks, we also know that it's a ranking factor in search. All of this by way of background, because what we're really here to talk about is the impact of all of these things in a world that's quite unknown to us, which is the mobile world. Now, sometimes it feels like all of these studies are done by big companies, and sometimes it feels, and I know this, that it doesn't apply to you. I understand that if Google search results are slow, they're going to be slow, but I run an e-commerce site. It doesn't apply to me. Or I see all of the stats from the largest companies in the world, and that's not my business. So really, I really want to do when we talk about some of the mobile statistics is bring it and make it real. Bring the facts on the ground, experiment, play with data. And ultimately, bring together these two diverse crowds on one thing we can all care about, which is if we make more money, we're all better off. Now, as a North American, I have to tell you, I believe that there are limits to that. Greed can certainly take over, and many of my countrymates and my partners down south have given greed a bad name. But I think that there are certainly limits upon which everyone in the organization can agree that it's beneficial to help users, and in so doing, make money. So let's take a look at the background on mobile. I am lucky enough to have started my career in the late 90s, and have lived through the end of the dot-com boom. And people come to me all the time and say, you're so lucky you got to live through the dot-com boom. And I say, well, you're so lucky because you're living through a revolution of your own. And that's the revolution of the mobile internet. And by the age of most of you in this room, you will be one of the lucky generations where over the last 100 years, we will be one of the first generations to truly live through two revolutions from a technology adoption perspective. Now, it's not enough to just have a mobile revolution. If I'm an e-commerce vendor, a SaaS vendor, I need those things to be useful. I need one of these. I don't need a phone where I can buy ringtones, a functional phone, a dumb phone. So what I want to do is I want to introduce you to a style of video that we're going to use throughout the presentation. I want to look at the percentage of smartphone shipments. A smartphone, think Android, think an iPhone, something with the browser, something I can monetize, versus functional phones. Think of the old Motorola flip phone. And what I really want to look and say is, if the mobile revolution is happening, what percentage of people own one of these? Because that's really important if I want to monetize that. Is this real? And I want to compare two regions. I want to look at Western Europe, and I want to look at Asia. So I'm going to create a baseline, and then we're going to stroll through the last 4 years and take a look at adoption. Let's take a look. So here's the baseline. Now, two very interesting facts come out of this for me. One is that in the Western world, think Western Europe, North America, we've hit the tipping point. Almost 60%, and it's going to be now 65, 70 this year, of devices are monetizable. I can make money on them. People can browse. I need to start caring. What's very interesting is that we have a lag in other parts of the world. I was in Argentina recently, and walking down the street, I was walking with my iPhone, and the partner that I was with said, "Put that away. There are only 20,000 of those in this country. This is a luxury." And you can see by the data from Asia that we certainly are coming up a curve, but we haven't hit it. Now, as a technologist, this is very exciting. This is the best of both worlds. This means that I have technology that I can develop today and lessons I can learn today that are applicable in one world and will soon be applicable in another. So I can leverage a lot of this learning for a future curve that seems unlimited. So it's one thing, great, people have phones. That's a good thing, and phones that we can monetize. The next question is actually slightly different, which is who owns these phones? Let's take a look at the dramatic change over the last 6 years and actually the underlying ownership of these phones. You can see that iOS has come out of essentially nowhere, the Apple product lines. We'll take a look at the just tremendous growth. Android has suddenly become a dominant market share. Windows and BlackBerry are two interesting animals we might spend a bit of time on. My countrymates at RIM are suffering today. My heart goes out to them. But two particularly dominant providers, and this helps us focus our energy. When we're looking at, I get people have phones, what types of phones, this gives us a sense. We now need to ask ourselves the question, are they using them? And what are they using them for? And this is a very difficult question to get data on. So we looked around at the massive information that's available of attributable studies or statistics that give us insight into how much traffic you have on a mobile phone. We found that there's very little data to back that up. Now, what's interesting also is to see, as we look at that data, how fast these devices are shipping. I mean, the iPads, we're going to come back to this, but this is amazing. And when we talk about whether people are using their devices, not only do we need to talk about how they're using them, but what devices they're using, because a tablet is very, very different than a phone. Let's take a look at 3 brands: Facebook, Twitter, Pandora, which is a music streaming service in the US, some of the only available data we can collect that's public to tell us how much traffic organizations are getting. Because I know there are phones, I get it, I know they're functional. Are people using them? Let's take a look. This is the percentage of mobile traffic. So, as an organization, you're going to have one of two thoughts. Either mobile's growing and I should take it seriously, or none of these companies are like me. I'm not one of these. They don't represent me. This data is interesting, but it represents Facebook. My company is an enterprise. I'm an e-commerce site. I'm a government. I'm an educational institution. This is some of the only publicly available information about how much traffic are coming through these devices. So the fact that there's very limited data, and the fact that this doesn't give us any idea of how much money people are making, really lends us to the next question, which is, I get there are phones. I get they're functional. I understand that at least for some organizations, the traffic is growing, possibly in a different percentile than yours. How much money is being made? So I want to take a look at 4 companies. The only 4 companies that we could dig up that provide this type of information. How much money? Let's take a look over the last 3 years. Take a look how much money they're making through the mobile phones. So it's nice to see a B next to it. That's billion. It's nice to see that there is growth. You can see that there's vast growth, very steep growth. When we look at some of the 2012 predictions, we're seeing doubling, tripling. And we're seeing this reach much farther down the curve to smaller e-commerce sites, for example. And those are the types of sites that I want to spend time looking at today. So let's jump into it. It's time to experiment. So when I saw that data, my first inclination was to say, interesting, not applicable. I want to look at real data, real customers, and I want to see the impact of performance on them. It's great to see the studies on desktop. I want to see what percentage are using mobile. I want to see how much it's worth. So I have 2 case studies to bring you through today. First case study is an interesting one. This is a US-based company that has a step-by-step flow that we're going to walk through. 5 steps. Got 5 across the finish line. So of 15 representative users that start, when every page on this mobile phone, or representative phone, is 4 seconds or less, 5 people finish the process. Now we want to really experiment and imagine each of these users, think of them as not as 15, but 15,000, 150,000, 1.5 million. Think in that scale. And think of each green user that finishes as being worth a couple $100. So now let's slow down one of the steps. I've got millions of data points, hundreds of millions in this case. Let's just take the data points where step 1 is slowed down by 1 second. So now I've got step 1 being a 5-second page, and all of the other ones being, again, 4-second pages. I'm going to slow down step 1 by 1 second. Let's take a look at the difference for your business, for this business. I lose almost twice as many on the first step. And I wind up with a massive attrition rate. 60% of my users are gone. Do you know this for your business? Do you know what 1 second delay would have an effect on one of these phones? I mean, first you have to figure out if people are buying, using. This is dramatic. When we showed this to the customer, they were amazed at the impact of 1 second on a mobile device. They couldn't believe it. In fact, they thought the data was flawed. Now, the business people in the room can check their phones at this point. For the geeks, we actually decided to do another experiment, which is, what if you actually slowed down a different step in the process? This has always fascinated me. Is it more important to have a quick first page, or middle, or end? Does it matter if it goes fast, slow, fast, slow? So let me show you just a bit of a thought experiment. In this space, when you have tons of data and you have a lot of time, which I do on airplanes, you can start doing some really interesting numbers. So here we're taking a look where step 3 is slow. Let's take a look. And step 1 is 4 seconds, step 2 is 4 seconds, step 5 is 5 seconds, then 4 and 4 again. Does it make it better, worse? This is what long flights are for. Let's take a look. Almost a doubling again of attrition on that particular step. But notice as we get to the end that I'm actually slightly better off. So this tells us one thing. It tells us, and this we've seen historically across all the studies, desktop and mobile, the first page that you go to is critical. Now, it also suggests the fact that we're losing 40% of people, as opposed to the fast site, still tells us that performance is really important on all steps of the process. Let's continue. Second case study. This is a retail customer, a very large retail customer. They do about somewhere in the rounds of $3 billion a year. They have 30,000 employees. And like the other customer, they let us slow down their site. This was a gift. Now, I want to give you a bit of a feel for this site. It was launched. It's been around for a very long time. It was launched early. It has many, many products on the site. And every customer spending around $100. Let me give you a feel for the customer, because I can't tell you who they are. Let me give you a bit of a feel for the customer. You can see their demographics here. And I love that when it comes to age, gray is used for the under 35 category. Makes me feel good in my older age. This is an older demographic, according to our designer. It's a female demographic, and in the United States, it's quite a rich demographic who's using this particular site. Interesting to see, and one of the reasons the site was picked is because they have 3 mediums to access the site through the mobile device. An app, an M.dot site, a mobile site specifically tailored for a mobile device, think simple, clean design, and the full site, which also receives a lot of mobile traffic. And it's interesting also to see the growth since over the last, over 2011 and through 2012, of their traffic. Take a look at how the mobile site, which was introduced in January, has grown. The app has grown, but this is for only mobile hits. So what's really interesting about this site is how many mobile page views actually come from the full site. These are people who opt and click on the View Full Site option, because the little skinny down site does not meet their needs. So this is very interesting. As we looked at this customer, we were surprised at how few hits the app had and how many hits the full site had. Now this is also very interesting because as we talked about earlier, I need smartphones, I need traffic, and I also need money. Because if I'm going to create the business case that speed matters in the mobile perspective, I need to make the argument that there's money to be had. And I can tell you in 2010, that was very, very difficult for the IT group in this business to make. 50 cents for every $100 was spent on a mobile phone. Now, when we look at the entirety of 2011, there is a massive difference. 14 times growth. We're now seeing $7 being spent on a mobile phone. This is the fastest growing sector from a technology perspective that this business has. Now, I'm not here to tell you that it's Pandora numbers or Facebook numbers or Target numbers. These are the numbers for real business. We're talking 7%. And what's most interesting is to see where that money is spent. When you look at that $7, we see that about 50 cents is spent on the app. A very small percentage. We also saw a correlation there with page views. We see that about $5.50 is spent on the full site on a mobile phone. These are people opting out of the small, skinny down site and spending their time on the full site. It also is iPad users. We'll take a look at their traffic from an iPad perspective. And about $1 is spent on the mobile phone. Again, real world data, real habits, 14 times growth. Now, it's also interesting to see for every 100 visitors that come in, what happens to them. And this was really surprising to us. 33, 34% jump off immediately to the full site. They want full functionality, they're used to full functionality, and they want it now. Many of them bounce, many of them leave, and one person buys on the M.dot site, on the mobile site itself. So a very interesting trend that we're seeing is organizations putting out simple mobile sites, buyers opting out, spending their time on the full site, particularly in the iPad, where people are actually looking for an even richer experience than they might have in a desktop, almost a magazine-type experience. Now let's take a look at this graph that we looked at before from the perspective of this customer. So we talked about how there's a dramatic change in who owns the phones. So let's take a look at this. Now I can't look at all of these numbers, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get rid of a few. Let's get rid of Linux. Let's get rid of other. We'll just get rid of those. I'm going to also unfortunately get rid of Windows, and people always ask me to break out the iOS device into iPads and iPhones. What we're going to do is we're going to put this off onto the same graph as we looked at for the first customer. Let's track over the course of a year and a half the page views that this organization gets. And we're starting at a baseline in the fall of 2009. In the fall of 2009, the iPhone is dominant. We've all have the iPhone 3 or 3GS, 3S, 3GS. The iPad is a glimmer. And the Google boys haven't really kickstarted Android. Let's take a look. At the top, you're going to see the percentage of total mobile page views for this customer. And you'll see over time as we progress a change. Let's take a look. So we start progressing through. We start progressing through. The Google boys rip off Mr. Jobs, at least according to Mr. Jobs, and the Android phone starts to grow. It starts to cannibalize some of the page views from the iPhone. The iPad, first generation, starts to come out, and you can see it starting to race. We come to the big marketing push, and everything comes up, and then it comes back a bit. The iPad is being bought for these 35-plus women. They're being taught by their kids how to use it at Christmas. We're now at Christmas time, and they've learned to use it, and the iPad starts to dominate. The iPhone and the Android are together. Thankfully, I don't have to differentiate between the two. The iPad grows, and it grows, and mobile traffic grows, and it grows. And we end midway through 2011 with 8% of page views being used on or being consumed on mobile. We land, thankfully, with the iPhone and the Android equal, because I never like debating between those religious points of view. And my poor friends at BlackBerry, my poor Canadian friends in Waterloo, die. So let's introduce another experiment. Again, data-driven. How important is performance? So we're going to do a slightly different experiment this time. A visitor is going to come in. We're going to decide whether to slow that visitor down. Content's going to hit the server. We're going to come back and make another choice. Should we slow them down? And if we do, we're going to make a choice about how much. Either 200 milliseconds, 500 milliseconds, or a full second for their experience. If we decide not to slow them down, they'll just go through. We capture the page. We capture the data. Hundreds of millions of transactions. Let's take a look. I want you to just think about this. Remember when I showed Google and it was 400 milliseconds faster? Look at what this does to this business. A 1-second slowdown on this device is a 3.5% difference in conversion. Again, remember when I was talking about KPIs and people meeting eye to eye? IT person in the room, come to your organization with this stat. Let's take a look at some of these in more detail. Bounce rate. So this is very interesting. This is the change in bounce rate over two of the cohorts that are slowed down, 500 milliseconds and 1,000. Now let me explain that bounce rate's going to go up and down naturally in a business. You do a marketing campaign that's successful, your bounce rate's going to go up. You do a marketing campaign to people that actually aren't interested in your product, they're going to leave and bounce early. Again, bounce rate, people who just leave. It's interesting to see that there's strong correlation between the group that slowed down by 500 milliseconds and the group that slowed down by 1 second. Very strong correlation between the two over the entire lifetime of the study, all 12 weeks. Now, we asked ourselves the question when we looked at this data, which is a really important question. So I understand that I'm going to lose 10% of my users because of a slow mobile experience. Again, 1 second. I get that. But what happens after? Is there some lingering effect from the disease, of the slowness? Is there something that happens long term? What we did is we actually continued to capture this data on a statistic that's really interesting. What percentage of users come back? We see that users that are slowed down don't come back as quickly. And what we saw is that even when we made them fast again at the end of the experiment in week 12, so this user who was slowed down by 1 second, when they come back week 12 plus 1 hour, they're sped up again. They're not slowed down. Notice that this disease, this illness of speed, actually has a dramatic effect long term, which is even 6 weeks out in the study. We saw that users that were slowed down had a smaller percentage of chance of returning, even when the site was sped up for that return visit. So you can't think of performance just as a statistic around what happens when it's slow. There are lingering and calculatable impacts. Now, one of the things that's really interesting in some of the studies we've done is also word-of-mouth study. So if I slow you down, or if you're slow, you're going to tell your friends, and your friends actually won't visit the site. So not only are there impacts we can measure here, tangible impacts for people that are slowed down long-term, there are also many intangible impacts that we're seeing through this hyper-connected universe. I suppose we should make a game out of it. After the session this morning, I'm thinking that would be I was thinking in my mind, what games could we create? Okay, so business people, we're going to go to questions in about 2 minutes. For the geeks in the audience, again, this is where I indulge the data analysis side of my brain. No customer's going to let me slow down their site by more than a second. I've asked, everyone says no. I can slow my own site down, which we do quite often. So what I want to know is I want to know the correlation. What does 5 seconds mean? What does 10 seconds mean? What are much larger delays? So what we did is when we capture data points, and again, feel free, business people, to get on your phone right now. But when the questions come, I'd love your attention again. What we wanted to capture was try to get some correlation between these things. So when we capture your data point on how fast you were, we also capture your latency, what your speed was, and your internet speed. And so we're able to draw a graph like this, where I'm going to look at the iPhone, the Android, and the iPad, Android phone, that is. And I'm going to start, I have 3 dimensions to this graph. I've got the bounce rate, which we've looked at in the other graphs. On the bottom, I've got median performance. And on the top, and then on the right-hand side, your internet speed. So at a very slow modem speed, think 3G in downtown Paris on a busy day. Let's take the iPhone. The iPhone's going to average over 15 seconds, and I'm going to have above a 20% bounce rate. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start speeding up the internet, different users, different cohorts of users that fall into those bands, and I'm going to take a look at what happens to performance across these numbers to try to see if I can find a line and then find actually what the slope of that line is, because that gives me this interesting sort of denominator for the return on my ROI. Again, I know you didn't plan to attend a data session, so this is why I reserved this for the end. Let's take a look. I'm going to start speeding up the internet. As it speeds up, I get faster users. As I get faster users, they bounce less, and they start coming down. Performance is getting better. As my speed is going up, my bounce rate's coming down, and it's coming down, and it's coming down, and there is a beautiful almost linear correlation between performance and bounce rate on mobile devices, and if I look at it just as a sheer line, it's beautiful. It's a thing of beauty for those of us that work in this world. A thing of beauty. So I can tell you that for an Android, at the difference between 15 seconds for an Android phone and 10 seconds is a 5% bounce rate. I can come to you, marketer, and I can give you insight into the value of performance. So we talked about changing priorities. We talked about the fact that I really want to come and allow you to understand what speed is doing to the flow of money on your organization. I can't tell you. This data gives you some hints. What we really need to do is allow you to collect data in your own organization, build your own curves, understand your own investment. We have 3 minutes left. I understand there are a few questions, so let's go to questions.
On va envoyer la première question. Can you repeat the question, please?
So that's a great question. Question is, how do you measure speed while networks take sometimes several seconds to deliver a call? And in this case, obviously, deliver a response. So mobile networks are one of the big problems in any study of mobile. So what we try to do to control for that is, one, we're taking all of our data points from the device itself. When I load a page, as soon as it's done, I send back to an analytics world, this is called real end user monitoring, the information that I had, me, as a consumer. So the first step is that we can't use synthetic tests for this. We have to use real data points. And then the way that we control for network conditions is just huge data sample sizes. So if I take two data points, I'm going to draw terrible conclusions. If I take 1 million, I start controlling for things like network quality at particular times. So in order to do these studies, in order to look at your data, if you're really interested, you need to use real end user monitoring. There are many vendors that provide tools for this. And you need larger data sets on mobile because of these challenges of mobile networks than you might when you talk about desktop performance. Now, if you're going to care about the performance value of money, you need some people in your organization that understand statistics. So just as an FYI, this can't be done off the back of an analyst's desk who has no statistical knowledge. You need to know what statistical viability is, what standard deviations are. You need to draw histograms. You need stats. Now, I've tried to take what are very complicated statistical algorithms and put them into pictures so that everyone can understand, which is really your job as technical people. Next question.
Question.
Oh, that's such a good question, which is how many CTOs are willing to sacrifice performance for experiments? The answer is very few. If I had more, I'd have more pretty graphs. The reality is this is difficult. It takes, well, you could think of this in two ways. Either it takes really smart CTOs or really dumb CTOs. Depends on your perspective. My perspective, I'd like to make them glorified heroes with superpowers. And these superpowers are trying to predict the future. But the reality is, it's very, very difficult. What we've been able to successfully do, and actually we've been helped by Facebook and Google, people that do micro experiments, Amazon, is that it's now cool to take 1% of your traffic and do stupid things to it. So we go to CTOs and say, look, Facebook and Amazon are constantly doing stupid things to 1 or 0.1% of your traffic. Let's also do that so you can make a better investment decision. So it's hard. If you're challenged by it, my information's available everywhere. I'd love to help you. Any other questions? We're coming up to the end.
So I guess it's fine. Thanks.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Merci.